Lena and John had just moved into a new apartment in the heart of the city. It was a beautiful place with high ceilings, large windows, and an overall cozy feeling. But as they began to unpack their belongings, they noticed something strange. One of the rooms seemed to be smaller than it should have been, as if there was an extra space hiding behind the wall. After some investigation, they found a small door tucked away in the corner of the room. At first, they were hesitant to open it, but curiosity got the best of them. As they stepped into the dark room, they realized that it seemed to have no end. The walls were bare and featureless, and the darkness swallowed any light they tried to shine into it. Lena and John were puzzled, but also a little excited. They couldn't resist the possibility of discovering something amazing, so they decided to explore the mysterious room further. As they walked, they noticed that the air seemed to be getting colder and the darkness more suffocating. Despite this, they kept pushing forward, driven by a sense of adventure. Eventually, they stumbled upon a door that seemed to lead to another world. It was a door made of wood and metal, with intricate carvings and markings etched into its surface. It looked like it was taken from a medieval castle and transported to the modern world. Lena and John hesitated, unsure of what lay beyond the door. But as they opened it, they found themselves transported to a different time and place. They were standing in the middle of a medieval castle, surrounded by knights and lords, and a world vastly different from their own. But it was like they were invisible because no one took notice of them. Lena and John were amazed, but also terrified. They didn't know how they ended up there or how to return to their own time. As they explored the castle, they found more doors that led to different timelines, each more terrifying and dangerous than the last. They were stuck in a time loop, and the only way to escape was to find the door that led back to their own time. But with each passing day, the timeline they were in became more unstable, and they knew that they had to hurry. As they traveled through different timelines, they encountered all sorts of horrors. From the Black Plague to World War II, they witnessed the darkest moments in human history. But it wasn't just the dangers of the different timelines that they had to worry about. They soon discovered that there were other people trapped in the time loop with them, people who had been wandering for years, desperate to find a way back to their own time. Lena and John tried to help the other trapped individuals, but they soon realized that the time loop was like a maze with no exit. The only way to break the cycle was to find the door that led back to their own time, and it seemed like an impossible task. They spent months wandering through different timelines, each one more terrifying than the last. But as they approached the one-year mark of their time loop, something strange happened. They found themselves back in their own time, standing in front of the mysterious door that had led them on their journey. But this time, they noticed something different about the door. It had a small inscription etched into its surface. Only those who face their fears can return to their own time. Lena and John realized that the door had been testing them all along. They had to face their deepest fears and overcome the horrors of the different timelines to break the time loop. With newfound determination, they stepped through the door and found themselves back in their own apartment. They were exhausted, but relieved to be back in their own time. As they settled back into their old routine, Lena and John couldn't help but wonder if the time loop was still out there, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it. They made a pact to keep the secret of the mysterious room and its doors to themselves, for fear that others might fall victim to its trap. But as the days passed, Lena and John noticed that something was off. The air in their apartment seemed heavier, and the darkness seemed to swallow any light they tried to shine into it. Then, one night, Lena woke up to the sound of whispering coming from the mysterious room. She tried to wake John up, but he was sound asleep. As she approached the door, she heard the whispers growing louder. Suddenly, the door flew open, and Lena was pulled into the darkness. She screamed for John, but he was nowhere to be found. As Lena stumbled through the darkness, she realized that she was back in the time loop. But this time, she was alone, with no one to guide her through the horrors that awaited her. She wandered for what felt like an eternity, through different timelines and different worlds, each more terrifying than the last. But she refused to give up, determined to find her way back to her own time and her beloved John. As the months passed, Lena faced her deepest fears and overcame the horrors that she encountered. She found the door that led back to her own time, but she was afraid of what was on the other side. How many months have gone by? Lena built up enough courage to open the door, and to her surprise, she was back in her apartment. Although it looked a bit different, everything seemed a bit more aged. But what stood out the most was that the dozens of pictures of Lena plastered all over the walls. As she walked around, and went into the next room, she saw an elderly man sitting in a chair, reading a newspaper. "Excuse me," Lena said. The old man looked up and couldn't believe his eyes. "Lena, it's you," he said. Lena was stunned. She couldn't believe that the old man in front of her was her beloved John. He had aged so much, and Lena realized that she had been gone for a very long time. "John, how long have I been gone?" she asked. "Almost 50 years, John replied with a sad smile. "I never gave up hope that you would come back to me, but I never thought it would take this long." Lena was shocked. She thought she had only been gone for a few months in her own time, but she had been trapped in the time loop for decades. "How is this possible?" she asked, still trying to process everything. "The time loop is a strange and unpredictable thing," John said. "It can trap you for a moment or for an eternity, depending on how long it wants to keep you." Lena felt a wave of sadness wash over her. She had missed out on so much in her own time, and everyone she knew and loved was probably gone. But as she looked around the room, she noticed something strange. The pictures on the walls were all of her, but they were different. "John, these pictures, they're not from our time," Lena said, confused. "I know," John replied. "When I realized that you were never coming back, I started traveling through different timelines, trying to find a way to bring you back. I collected all these pictures of you from different times and places, hoping that one day you would come back to me." Lena felt a tear roll down her cheek. She had missed so much, but John had never given up on her. "I'm sorry," Lena said, feeling guilty for putting John through all this. "Don't be," John said, smiling. "I would do it all over again, just to have you back." Lena felt a rush of love for John. Even after all these years, he was still the same kind and loving man that she had fallen in love with. As they sat together in the cozy apartment, Lena and John talked about everything that had happened in their lives. Lena told John about the horrors she had faced in the time loop, and John told Lena about his adventures through different timelines. But as the night wore on, Lena knew something was off about John's stories. Lena couldn't help but wonder if the time loop was still out there. Was she even in the right timeline? Was this the same John she had fell in love with years ago? "We have to destroy the door," Lena said, determined. "We can't let anyone else fall victim to it." John nodded in agreement. "I've hidden the original door in my storage unit. We can head out first thing in the morning and destroy it." "No, we need to head there now. Don't you remember what happened last time?" Lena said. "Fine." John mumbled, "Let's go." They set out to the storage unit, but as they are driving, Lena notices that John is behaving strangely. Rubbing his head, tapping the steering wheel, and talking to himself. Lena passes it off as maybe it's something to do with his age. After about 10 minutes they arrive at what looks to be a small garage. They get out of the car, and as John starts to unlock the unit, but he hesitates. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. With a confused look on her face, she says, "Of course, hurry up and open it, John." John opens the door and flips a switch to turn on the lights. Lena walks in and notices that the room was gigantic, almost like it was never ending, much bigger than it looks from the outside. But there was nothing to be seen. "I'm confused, John. Where is the door?" Lena said. But there was no reply. Lena turned around and John was gone. Not only that, but the door she came through was also gone. Panic set in and Lena knew what had happened. She had already went through the door. But this was much different than all the other times she had been trapped in the time loop. There was nothing, just a never-ending white room. Lena, after all these months, gives up. She sits down and cries for what must have felt like an eternity. Her tears turned to blood. And the room got bright. Brighter than anything she had seen, and then all of a sudden the room went pitch black. After about 30 seconds it was like someone flipped on a switch. Lena could see again, and what she saw horrified her. It was John, but he was young again. "I finally found you," John said as he pointed a gun at her. "You must be very confused, Lena, but for everything to go back to normal, you have to trust me. I love you," and John pulls the trigger, and all the memories of what happened over the past months flashes before Lena's eyes, and she's suddenly back at her apartment. She notices that John is unpacking and he motions her over. "Check out that room over there, it looks smaller than when we first checked out this place," he said as he started going towards the room. "No, don't go." Lena yells, How about we find a different apartment, John? This one doesn't feel right." John stops and tries to argue with Lena, but there was no persuading her. She was not living through the same horror again. John eventually agreed and they decided to move somewhere else. A year has passed and, even after all this time, Lena doesn't know if what happened was real or just a nightmare. Either way, she has John with her again, and that's all she needs. They can finally live together in peace.